Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today because I wanted to have some fun and just kind of do some projects. Because I've done so many projects where, I felt okay, these are my normal, every day to day projects, and, I always feel like I have always something, really just set up. And, today I wanted to go in and just go, but on the wheel of just movies or shows or whatever, and just kind of have fun with it. And Lucy is just one of those where I went in seeing this once before, and I wanted to go back into it and just have fun with it, just because I'm like, you know what, this movie is actually really fun. You have these kind of films that some people would probably compare this movie to a Crank kind of movie, or some people would eventually compare this to possibly Upgrade, or some people would probably compare this to the Kate Beckinsale, or yeah, Beckinsale movie Jolt, and the list kind of goes on. A lot of people probably compare this to a number of movies that at the end of the day, I could say, yeah, I love a movie where, and also Split, of course. So I love a movie where you have something that is to obviously say is impossible, and there is to be a case where it is to be possible, where all of a sudden we have this one of a kind person that is to go on and prove that a person can use more than 10% of their brain. We have a lot of psychic movies Dreamscape, where people can do certain things with their mind or psychic ability or whatever. But we go further and further on with this character, and there's also a scientific breakdown that Morgan Freeman's character is, Professor Norman, is to also break down with this also. So, going towards this movie, we have an early part of a simple concept where we have this girl who is to be one way or another forced to go into this building to drop off this thing that she believes is just paperwork. And she is to find out that it's a lot more than just paperwork. And she ends up becoming this mule of sorts, and so do three other men. So Lucy is to go on to accidentally find her way into some place where she is to be imprisoned, to then eventually have these drugs go into her system, because these bags aren't exactly the thickest, most durable thing, of course. And so Lucy is to one way or another figure out how to escape the place that she had been imprisoned, and then goes off to try and figure out what the heck is inside of her and to get it the heck out. So Lucy, who seems to have realized that she is going to have a very short human lifespan, is to go off and find somebody who is to be able to know the most about this kind of study. And so she ends up lending herself onto Professor Norman, and they are to try and maybe not solve her problem, maybe not eventually get her to be absolutely 100% cured, to where she is back to 10% and all of this is all gone. Basically, we're just there to watch the spectacle of which that this girl goes about her life. And for however long it is, to reach that 100% of brain power, which really we don't have a indefinite answer to this, because it's never been done. A lot of this probably has to be hypothesizing and just saying like, well, I guess someone would have to be this because it's the only thing that really makes sense. And so someone would just have to do this just because they would just have to at this point. So, with that said, how do I feel about this film? Well, this is just yet another like experiment gone horribly awry kind of film, and I can enjoy it. Like I can have fun with this movie, and I will possibly go back to it. Like this is a movie that, for some people, they may feel the same. They may hate this movie. They may like this film. I really like how this, of course, is to be like Lucy, who is starting to like. How very rarely do we actually have female characters, main female characters, that are to have this very interesting development. And I think a lot of people just enjoy this movie just for its scientific like approach and just want to like see the story build as percentages go up and up and up. Like a lot of people might also enjoy this movie simply because we also have it be very similar to possibly like a Mob Psycho 100, which is an anime where eventually Mob Psycho 100 at some point is to possibly use 100% of his brain function, and like we have this kind of shift of this character needing to go and take out certain monsters, certain ghosts, or just quite possibly other things with his brain power that he is to use. And so we get to see certain percentages of this person's brain power shifting into like what is fairly simple to be compared to this film. Like I almost forgot about that whole reference. I'm like, oh yeah, like I have seen Mob Psycho 100. Very funny anime, very funny show. If you've never seen it before, definitely go out of your way to say that you've seen it. It's a fun anime because we have this guy who has hired Mob on, the guy Mob, and he is going and faking that he is to be able to take down these ghosts. And eventually Mob is to come on in and take these ghosts away from this environment. And then because we have this guy who is to kind of work these people into conning them to thinking that he could figure out how the ghosts can go away, but really he's not that guy, to where eventually we find out that Mob is that guy. So with that said, let's just go into where is a convenient way to find this movie and watch it? Because I know a lot of people might be thumbing through and be like, okay, there's not a convenient real app to go out of your way to see this. Because I think when I went in, like I think I saw that it was on like certain, like if you go on to Amazon, it's like a rent or buy option. I think there are possibly plenty of apps that probably do have this, but like it's probably not like a very convenient thing. I will suggest immediately you can go into a app that is on Google Play that you can search the word TV Crush, and you should be able to watch that movie there for absolutely free. And conveniently, you can find also a number of things, either kind of new releases or some kind of stuff there. You could also go onto a Google search and Google certain apps like Letter C Movies, and pretty much after that, if you download that app, you'll be able to pretty much see anything. I also kind of team up that app by Google searching the word Fox HD Movies, and you'll see a title that'll say like play 1080p HD movies, but like the logo will say Fox HD Movies. If you go into this app, teaming it up with reasonably Letter C Movies, you should be able to like it's you basically have unlimited access. Like the only thing that you may not have complete access to, if something is to be a brand new movie or a brand new show, like I couldn't find conveniently like Super Crooks, which was like a brand new anime for Netflix. I couldn't find that on either one of those apps because conveniently like these apps don't cover everything because there is a lot to cover for these apps, and like so they have to kind of pick and choose like what they can find, but kind of search through everything, and you can probably run out of things to just say, oh, like they have this cool. Because I went through and kind of ran through the gauntlet of like, I'm going to find the most obscure movie that I know of and search in there, and surefire enough, they tend to have pretty much most, if not all, of my search things. So I'm like, great, like very rare can you not find something? If it's a popular enough movie, it'll probably be in there. So let's dare say go into that double five, because otherwise that time yet again to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about the time to spoil this movie. So I'm going to try to get to this film as perfectly as I can, but it kind of gets to where we get the second half of all like the percentage build up and stuff like that, where I didn't like go through percentage per percentage, because really it just the certain percentages like it like doesn't equal to me understanding like how this all drastically like changes via percentage, like what is the actual breakdown. I think they do a really good, thorough job of explaining this, and that's where I can like enjoy this movie. Like it's just kind of a cool, fun, experimental thing where there's also a little bit of action mixed in, but it's a really fun movie. I really enjoyed it. So let's go out of our way to say it's spoiler time. Let's just go into it. So very beginning of this movie, we have Lucy who is talking to a boy named Richard. So Richard is to go on and say that Richard has gone into this building way too often, and like they don't usually like they're not really warmed up to this guy. They don't really like this guy, and so Richard is to please ask Lucy to go and take this briefcase into this office and just ask for Mr. Jang, and then like he can unlock this briefcase and take this briefcase, and you'll be done. And supposedly this guy was gonna get $1,000, and I'm just like, wow, that seems kind of low for, but like maybe that seems like a reasonable like payout. That might be a couple weeks worth of money there, but like to me, I'm like, it seems kind of low, like for a drug deal where your life might be on the line. But like, I guess there's not gonna be a massive payout for this. So, and plus, a lot of times, like I think movies tend to like say that there's gonna be some huge payout, like thousands upon thousands of dollars for you to like go and do this, and actually it's just like, hey, here's $20, there you go. Or if you're lucky to even get that out of it all. So Lucy is to come up with every excuse to not do this. She's like, you know what, I got exams tomorrow, like I'm really busy, like I know, like I'm not gonna go and do this, like why don't you go and do this, like. And he's like, he's coming up with every excuse. He's like, well, like I've come in there too often, like they know me, I always wear the same hat. And so Lucy's like taking off the hat, and she's like, there you go. It's like, go on. So there is this back and forth consistently happening, but then finally Richard just goes and cuffs Lucy and says like, okay, now you have to go because you have the briefcase. And Lucy's like, you son of a like I told you I wasn't going. And Richard's like, well, you're going now, I need you to do this, so go ahead and do this. What if she didn't do it? What if she just ran off with it? Like, what was he going to do? Like, kill her for it? Like, he needed her to go and do this. I guess it's lucky that she went and did this. She could have walked off with the briefcase, could have figured out a way to unlock this handcuff brief. Like, is this guy going to, like, go and grab her and chuck her into this building? I doubt it. So Lucy goes inside the building and is to go and ask for Mr. Jang. And so Richard is outside the building, like outside this window, and he's like, yeah, like you did it, like great. So all of a sudden there's these massive amount of muscled men that come out to go on and like give the kind of the desk guy like a huge chunk of $100, and then they go and grab Lucy, and Richard ends up getting shot in the head, and so Lucy ends up going into this room, and for the version of which that I saw, like there isn't always like subtitles there, but like the stuff that they are to talk about isn't really important, and plus there's very little times where there isn't a subtitled thing. So definitely go into like TV Crush to eventually get like subtitles for most of this, because maybe there might be some point in time where not every bit of this is to be in a subtitled thing, and probably go into TV Crush first to conveniently find a subtitle version because they're good at that. So like go into like subtitled English so you can get some of the subtitles in this movie. It's very rare. You could probably watch the whole entire movie without the subtitles. Like it's not like hugely like plot changing of a thing, but it's whatever. So, because what happens is we have the guy start talking in Chinese, but it's basically just figuring out who this Lucy girl is, and so right after that, there's to be a guy that comes in through a phone that is to translate for Mr. Zhang and to translate for Lucy so they can talk together. So Lucy is to go and is to, of course, talk to this guy on the phone, and so she ends up saying that she doesn't know what's inside the briefcase. She doesn't know anything, and so really Mr. Zhang is just like, well, like he still wants answers. He still wants to know what's inside the briefcase. And so they're kind of going round and round, and like he's asking like her like, well, like we need to know like what's inside of it. Like we need to know the contents, like where did you like go, and like who brought this with. And so Lucy's like, I'm sorry, like do you, like guy who I'm talking to, do you speak English? Like, and he's like, yeah, I took a year uh learning the language. And she's like, well, really? Because I don't think you're understanding me. Because like this girl knows nothing. She barely even knows who this guy is. And so Mr. Jang is just like, okay, fine. So she gets handed these three numbers, and so Mr. Jang goes off uh, out of the room to just kind of brace for the fact that this could be an explosive. All these guys are going wearing these like SWAT like shields, waiting for this to be some bomb that goes off. So we also had at some point where Richard's body was in some room somewhere, getting like viciously like pulled into the room, I guess. And maybe maybe he was going and getting dissected to just have his kidneys or his liver or his lungs or whatever go off to go onto the black market. Maybe that's why this guy was so bloody, possibly. So Lucy is to ask the guy who's the translator, hey, I got like a three numbered thing and I don't know what this is. And the guy is to say, it's like, well, that's the numbers for the briefcase. Like, you go and you unlock these three numbers, and you should be able to open the briefcase. So Lucy then opens the briefcase, and we are to find out that this is drugs. And it's blue drugs. I'm like, yeah, blue drugs, woo! So Lucy was to be told that this is to actually be paperwork, and she was lied to by Richard. We also have Lucy telling Mr. Jang that she barely knew who Richard was because she had only been dating him for like a week or so. So Lucy goes on and is to see Mr. Jang go and take a straw and pick a little piece of this drug up. They bring in some, of course, guy that's probably tried every single drug under the mat, or drug ever made. And so this guy ends up testing this drug, and then he's like, whoa! This guy is feeling so much of a high or some kind of something that they have Mr. Jung just shoot him in the head and get rid of him. It's like, well, I guess this is some kind of drug that we have here. So we have Mr. Jung then having Lucy forced to go and do this job, and Lucy's like, well, what if I don't want to do this job? It's like, you're gonna do this job. So Lucy is to get knocked out, to be woken up with a cut over her chest, her belly, telling us that she is going to be a drug mule and that she is going to be taken into certain areas to get this all be taken out of her body and then be sold somewhere. We find out 3 other mule-like people are going to Berlin, Paris, and Rome. And so Lucy is to go on and get her head covered, and then is to go off to some plane somewhere and is to fly off. So in the very beginning of this movie, we are to, of course, show the very first monkey that eventually was to start off us evolving from monkey to man. And so now we have it where Morgan Freeman, who is Professor Norman, is to kind of break down a person's brain. And that he is to start kind of telling us or helping us figure out kind of the percentage of a brain, where 10% is to be the normal brain that anyone is to ever have, and the only case seemingly of a thing on Earth having more than 10% of their brain is a dolphin, who is to actually have the ability of 20% of their brain being able to be used. And so a dolphin is to be able to use this thing called sonar to find where everything is. And so that's kind of an interesting function for this dolphin to it would be weird if they went on to try and figure out some way of taking the dolphin ability and using 20% of our brain, Lucy is to go and take 20%. You would think that would have been some kind of if there was ever to be some kind of Animal Man kind of movie or something like that, if DC was to ever put that out, You would think like an Animal Man would want the dolphin ability to use 20% of their brain, and that could be an interesting just film. And supposedly it's kind of funny because Morgan Freeman is to mention that once you start to unlock after the first 10% is kind of unlocked, eventually you can start to open up evidently much more doors. Like the ball starts to get rolling on your ability to use more than 20%. So eventually Morgan Freeman is to break down like at 40%, you can have control over others and control over matter. And so he goes on, and like certain students are asking certain questions about like, well, hey, like, has there ever been a case like this before? And Norman is just like, nope, like never been a case. This is all theoretical, and this is all just uh, like trying to like just come up with a hypothesis or some kind of conclusion of what could happen when somebody's to have this kind of brain function. So we also have somebody who is to mention it's like, well, like you would have thought the immediate question it's like, well, like how much percentage of a brain would somebody have if they were like psychic? I guess that would probably be around the uh like the almost 20% margin. And you would think if like Norman or Professor Norman was to mention that once you start to like unlock that part of your brain, like the ball starts to get rolling, then why isn't that these people haven't used way more than really just 20% of their brain? I'm curious to get beyond the whole like psychic thing, or the whole like reading someone's mind, or the whole like what we get here with Lucy. So we find out when Lucy is to go on and talk to this guy who is to speak English, telling Lucy that the drug that's inside her is to be called CPH4, and is to go on and break down to her like, hey, like, like, is there any other cool name that you could probably come up with? Because we haven't yet. Because we don't really care. It's just a new drug. So we have Lucy, who is to be this mule and is to be imprisoned by this one guy who is to basically start to feel her up. Like he's just easily taking advantage of this girl and just like touching her wherever he wants. And so when Lucy is to get kicked by this guy who's imprisoning her, all of a sudden the that's inside her is to start to open, and things are starting to get unleashed inside of her. And so now Lucy is chained to this one part of this wall, but she is to start to like kind of start to like fly all over the place, where all of a sudden she's on the ceiling, and like the light is malfunctioning that she's on top of. Like she is going like from one side of the room to the other and all over the gosh darn place. And so, but it seems that Lucy is to eventually just kind of reset and just like be okay. So all of a sudden this guy again is to come inside this room, and Lucy is to present herself like she is ready and she's in the mood now for this guy. He comes near her, and she goes and takes him out, basically kills him, and then she ends up just going through this one room, knowing already where all these guys already are, and she shoots every one of them. I'm like, oh my god, this is so cool. So Lucy then grabs all of these guns and all of everything, even this one jacket, and she ends up pulling this gun out of her shoulder and chucks it off to the side. So Lucy ends up leaving this environment that she is in, and she immediately goes to this hospital, and she is to. Or no, 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 no. No, I think we're good. So, because I think I'm missing at one. No, I think I covered everything. Um, like I'm just trying to figure out where everything is perfectly in line. So we have Lucy who just decides to commandeer a medical room because the person that they are operating on, she knows he's going to die soon. And so she's like, okay, well, like you're going to put you're going to do surgery on me, and you're going to remove this drug that's inside of me. And so they're like, okay, like, well, immediately we should take you out. We should give you an anesthetic or get you something to just have you fall asleep. And she's like, no, like, just do it while I'm awake. So Lucy is just going on, and she is taking a phone call while she's getting surgery on, or surgery being put onto. However to word that, Lucy is taking a phone call while surgery is being um, done on her. Yeah, there we go. That's the perfect word of saying it. So Lucy is to go and call her mother, and like Lucy is to weirdly say that I can feel everything. She is to mention how like she can feel her like every bit of everything. Like when she was like 1 years old, she could remember like petting the cat. Like she could remember like her mother breastfeeding her. She could remember like every single like stitch of every single moment of her life. And she can feel everything. She can feel her bones growing, and or she could feel her bones growing when she was younger, and so on and so forth. And like she could feel every single bit of everything. And so her mother is just like, okay, that's interesting. But then it seems that Lucy is to start to drop out of phone calling with her mother. The call drops out. So the doctor is to eventually need to know what this drug is, and he takes a sample of it. And she's like, well, how much is left in there? And he's like, 500 grams. And so he's like, well, or like, what, like, do you happen to have a name for this drug? And she ends up saying like CPH4, and he's like, oh my god. And she's like, what? CPH4 is to be a thing that is to be inside of a pregnant woman 6 weeks in, supposedly. And it's to basically be an atom bomb inside a woman's belly, I guess, to produce a child. And so we have it where Lucy has gone in and had this drug coursing through her system, and she's not going to produce a baby out of this. She's going to produce crazy amount of just almost superpower-ish like out of this, because uh, she might as well. Let me pause here for 1 second. All right, I had to charge my tableto. Probably. Anyways, we'll push on here. So we'll get back. I mean, not push on. So really we have this doctor who's just like, oh my god, I don't even know how you're alive right now. Like, you should not be alive. Like, this should have just destroyed you, but weirdly it didn't. So Lucy is just like, well, okay, like, I guess there's not much I can do now. And so Lucy is going on and is uh, going to her friend's place, or maybe her place. Either way, it's a place nonetheless. And so she's talking to her friend Caroline, who has like a really brief part in this movie. Like, it's funny how like Caroline like went on Tipton went on to do like a number of movies and like really had gone on to do a mass amount of things after this. But like this probably might have been like a starting point of her maybe getting work. But so Caroline is Caroline is to go on here and is to just ask Lucy. It's like, well, hey, like, where's Richard? And Lucy's like, she's dead. And so Caroline is like, oh, you guys are so crazy. So Caroline goes off, and so Lucy is to go online and is to find a guy who is to be the leading expert on increasing brain percentage capacity, whichever. So it seems that only Professor Norman is the only person that is to be able to have this case study of sorts. And so she is going on to call him, and so he is to answer. And so Lucy is to talk to Professor Norman and tell him like what she can do with her like percentage right now, that she's technically at 28%. She can go and control her metabolism. She control like other people somewhat, like other people's brains and stuff like that. She can control technology, like she can like certain kind of cell phones or TVs or something like, and she showcases all of this, the stuff that she can kind of show from a distance. So we have, of course, Professor Norman, who's like, oh my god, like she's actually doing all this. And so, because he had also talked to her in the beginning, that she is to say is that she, in one fell swoop of a day, was to read every single bit of Professor Norman's research in one single fell swoop of a day. And he's like, well, I'm sorry, but that's impossible. I had like written like a ton of paper, and she's like 6,924 or something like that. And so he's like, oh my god. Like, she's like, well, do you want me to recite any of them to you, like back to you, to just confirm that all this paperwork is actually yours? And he's like, no. That's okay. So so yeah. So before Lucy was to go and talk to Professor Norman, but let me wrap that up also. So Professor Norman was to say like, well, like I need to see you somehow. Like I need to like have this like as a real like this seems so like unreal, like as if I'm dreaming this, like kind of thing. Like in probably his mind, that's probably what he's thinking. I'm paraphrasing here. So Professor Norman is like, well, like when can I see you? And she's like, in 12 hours I will be in Paris. And he's like, okay, all right, like great. So Lucy, before she is to go on and talk to, of course, uh, Professor Norman, she goes back to go and wipe out every single person that's in Mr. Zhang's office, and then goes and takes two blades, sticks it into Mr. Zhang's hands because she wants information of where the other mules are going. And so she ends up going and like touching Mr. Zhang's brain, and she figures out a way to get that knowledge. And so that's when we end up finding, of course, that one character is going to Berlin, Paris, and Rome. So then she leaves and does not kill this guy because he was to go and get cucumbers on his eyes so that way he couldn't see her. And he's also getting a tattoo, so I guess he couldn't like sense her because he's also wearing like headphones. He's listening to music. So Lucy is to, of course, go on and is to make her way onto this plane. And so while she is to her like brain function like thing, and so one woman is to go on and tell Lucy, like, I'm sorry, ma'am, but you have to close your laptop. Like, we're going to be landing soon. And so Lucy is just like, well, hey, can you give me some champagne? And also, can you cover your nose? Like, because you're going to be bleeding soon. And this stewardess is just like, so what now? And then all of a sudden her nose is like bleeding. She's like, oh my God. Like, we also had Lucy who was to tell like Caroline like how like best to kind of like medically like save herself because evidently her liver is failing. So yeah, definitely go and like take certain medications and whatever. So Lucy is on this plane now having 30%. And so all of a sudden, Lucy is to even get into 40%. And while she's on this plane after she gets her champagne, we have Lucy who is almost starting to Thanos snap herself. And she is starting to fade away. And she's like, what the heck is going on? Like, my skin is coming off my hand. And so Lucy rushes to the bathroom, and like all of her body is either starting to melt or is to start to like fade away from her. And she's like, oh my God. So Lucy is to crazily go and find much more of these drugs on her, these blue drugs. I'm like, I don't know how she got this through the airport, but okay, sure. So Lucy is to go on and kind of like consume more of these drugs weirdly. And so all of a sudden, Lucy is to have this kind of like weird like thing going on with her where her body is just kind of like bursting out, but then kind of really sucks all back in and just kind of resets. And it seems that Lucy is fine once we get to 40%, where she's kind of like fading away, but then she regains herself. I guess seemingly by her consistently taking more and more of these drugs, it's going to keep her much more alive or much more contained until eventually she is to completely run out of these drugs and make it to 100% anyways, where she's going to eventually just be this unstoppable being of sorts. So now we go on and we, of course, while Lucy is going on this plane, she is going and calling Piel del Rio, who is to be some officer who is to go on and find these three drug mules and find all of these, or find most of these drug mules. But then eventually we turn around and have Mr. Zhang going and tearing all these out of all these drug mules and putting them all in this briefcase. which Del Rio is to go with Lucy to eventually take from them by using her power to, because she meets up with Del Rio. I'm kind of going really quickly through this. And then she goes to this hospital where these guys were to be taken from this. They were to be having all these drugs taken from them. We even have Lucy, who kind of tears through one guy, takes the drug, drops it into the briefcase. So Lucy just goes and has all these kind of thugs either trapped into some kind of wall that they don't quite understand, or to be pushed to have them kind of flying up in the air and there's nothing they can do. So Lucy is to, of course, get the briefcase from one of the thugs, and then she is just to walk away from this place with all these drugs. And so she is to push on and go to Professor Norman. And so Lucy is to tell Del Rio to protect her and use all the resources that he can to try and protect her. But it seems that Del Rio is realizing that Mr. Jang also seems to have a really substantial people working for him, to where it's going to be very difficult for him to be able to stop these characters from making their way to Lucy, because that seems to be where they are going. They're just going and trying to stop her or get to her before she ends up getting to 100% capacity, because she's going to make it there. So Lucy, of course, is to meet Professor Norman, and Lucy is to call Professor Norman and say, like, hey, yeah, like, I have a bunch of scientists here, and like, they're very trustworthy. And Lucy's like, oh yeah, I definitely trust you. I know that you're the guy for this job. And Professor Norman is like, well, thanks. So Lucy is to make it to this room, and she knows who everyone is, like, because she knows everything at this point. And like, she's pretty much almost as quick or as intelligent as Google at this point. And so we start to get the percentages that are to start to knock down for Lucy to now make it to 100%. And so Lucy is to go on and have all these drugs be put in her through a like IV like drip to try to kind of keep her contained. And so Lucy is to also mention that there might be like some difficulty with them getting to be able to have all of her information. We have Lucy kind of breaking this down, that you could possibly have a car, and a car could quite possibly go like in one video. You can speed that car up so fast into one video that eventually the car just disappears, because it is going into an infinite amount of speed, to where the car just no longer exists, to where it's just like it's going so fast that all of a sudden you just no longer see it anymore, because it's going so fast, it's going so quickly. And so like, I kind of found that, like, the whole science of that thing kind of fascinating, that you kind of see the car going so fast that all of a sudden it just disappears at some point, and it's just like, it's like a magic trick. So that the car is still there, but it's going at such a mass speed that you can't see it coming. And I guess it's possibly like the speed of light, where like where who knows if like how you can really see something that's going like absurdly at like a Mach whatever kind of speed or whatever. and so on and so forth. So, okay. I wanted to make sure I'm like, what's going on here? Because it was kind of glitching. So Lucy is to like do all like talk to all these scientists and kind of break down certain things. And so, but Lucy is eventually to take all these drugs and consume all of them, and she is to start to like break down the percentages to where all of a sudden she is recreating the room that she is in, like after she is to basically go on and become this new generational or generation computer, this next gen computer that is to have never been thought of before. And so Lucy's going and kind of grabbing all this technology, these cameras, these uh, like this kind of equipment, and she's kind of consuming all of it to become this next gen computer. And so all of a sudden, like Lucy is to all of a sudden start to basically travel everywhere, like travel through space and then eventually travel through time. And so we just see Lucy all of a sudden at Paris at this Eiffel Tower looking at it, and then all of a sudden she is to eventually be uh, at this kind of one uh, hilltop somewhere, and then she is to be in uh, God, what is it? Times Square, and then she is to realize that like there's people starting to move, and she's to realize it's like, well, hey, like, can I move them like however I want to? And then she's starting to realize that she can like travel in time by forcing everybody to move the way that she wants to. All of a sudden now we have Lucy who's traveling back through certain periods of time, like traveling back to the horse and buggy days, traveling back to the Native American days, traveling back to the very first monkey that had ever to eventually evolve into a, what would I guess be, a caveman. And Lucy's kind of like, hey monkey, like, hey. So all of a sudden, like, Lucy is to get to, we're about right around this time where she's about like 99% almost like completed. And so we have Mr. Jane going through and like bringing in like rocket launchers and bazookas and all kinds of stuff to get to where Lucy is. And he eventually succeeds getting in there. And so he holds a gun to Lucy's head. And so Del Rio conveniently comes in there and is to then kill Mr. Jang. And Lucy had gone to 100% to where he cannot go, like, he basically doesn't, like, Del Rio doesn't even see Lucy anymore. And Lucy is to basically say, like, I am everywhere. Because, like, Del Rio is to look up at his phone and just kind of see, like, where Lucy is possibly. And she says, I am everywhere. And so we also had that one really cool moment where Lucy was to go into Del Rio's precinct and basically empty out his gun. And so Del Rio was like, whoa, like, I've seen some weird, like, but, like, this is pretty weird. And so it just gets to the point where, like, Del Rio is like, I don't even know how I'm going to be able to really help you, but, like, I don't know, like, we'll figure something out. But, yeah, so Lucy just kind of fades into this next gen computer and is to give Professor Norman this USB. and then she ends up just kind of like we just kind of have her peace out after that. Like that's how the movie just kind of ends with Professor Norman getting this information or these videos or this whatever to kind of have all this proof that is to be what all he needs. Maybe they find out the answers of everything, and so yeah, that's how this movie ends up just kind of breaking down. Again, I didn't like after we got to kind of 40%. I kind of just was like, well, okay, like she eventually gets to 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 to 100. And so like and this all kind of happens while like Lucy is to be talking to these people and try to explain things and whichever. And so like there's not like some event buildups that is to have her showcasing these percentage like powers with the exclusion of time travel and all the stuff that I kind of just mentioned, where she basically has the ability to seemingly do whatever she wants because basically she's like almost God at that point. So, with that said, that's I think all that I wanted to cover in this film. If anybody is to go on and say the exact whatever percentages and whatever, because there are probably some brain scientist or whatever, or there's some person that knows how to break this down a lot more, because I'm sure there's that person that is going to go through and like break down every single like because there's those people, which is okay. Like because I meet all kinds of rando, like no offense, but like I meet a bunch of rando like people that are to actually break down to me like the whole science of it, and I'm just kind of fascinated by that. But then I'm just like, okay, like there's not much for me to really do with that because pretty much afterwards, like this is just a one-off experience where there's not much I can do with that kind of like knowledge to go and break down into other things or movies or shows or whatever. But it's always fascinating. It's always interesting. And like I think I just wanted to just watch this movie just because it's like a fascinating kind of thing, a fascinating kind of breakdown of like, well, like what if we could just kind of expand our horizons and just be almost becoming a somewhat superhero like character, which is to basically be Lucy. So like and it was kind of funny how like Richard made up this thing where he was to say that the very first woman was to ever be called Lucy and he found that somewhere. I wonder if Lucy could have used her like super brain and realized that whole thing was like false or wasn't true. Like the first one was ever to be called like Bah or something. Like the first person was Bah and like the first ever recorded woman was actually called Angelina Abracabra or something. She would have disproven that or something. But anyways, uh, like with Google, like it's kind of funny. Like I guess I probably could have Googled this and like said like, hey, like the whole Lucy thing. What is a much more like breakdown of whatever? I'm sure somebody had broken down like this whole thing and like broken down like every bit of this, but I just wanted to have fun with this movie because this movie is a really fun, like experimental movie. So I'm gonna get out of here before this movie or this review gets any longer. So I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, buddy.